I've never been one for parties, even in college. I got sick of the whole going out culture pretty quickly, and I found that I always had more fun doing something meaningful with a few close friends. I'm from a rural area, northwestern Ontario. This happened a couple years ago. Ever since I was a kid, my dad and his buddies had a New Year's Eve tradition of going ice fishing while everyone else was celebrating the New Year however they celebrated. My mom wasn't really in the picture, and we didn't have much extended family, so I grew up spending New Year's Eve on a frozen lake in the frigid cold with my dad, his brother, my brother, and my dad's friends. My dad isn't around anymore, and my brother moved to Chicago a number of years ago, but I still try and go ice fishing as much as possible, especially as a way to celebrate New Year's Eve. I'm not really sure why, I just feel like I have some kind of obligation to keep the tradition going. My two best friends, Nate and Trevor, are pretty rugged guys themselves. You know the type, those burly, lumberjack-looking dudes that seem more in touch with wilderness than society. That's honestly how I describe myself too. Anyway, the three of us tried to keep the tradition alive as best we could, which was great because spending New Year's Eve alone would be depressing as hell. Nate was the one driving that day. His truck was perfect for the job. Big tires, four-wheel drive, and enough room in the back for all of our gear. We'd packed everything we needed: rods, tip-ups, bait, a sled to haul everything, and a small pop-up shelter to shield us from the worst of the cold. The forecast predicted a clear night, but in Ontario, you never trust the weather reports entirely. We were prepared for anything. At least, we thought we were. The lake we were heading to wasn't a well-known spot, and that's what we loved about it. It was tucked away, surrounded by thick trees with a surface that stayed frozen solid even in the milder parts of winter. It wasn't a place you'd stumble across unless you knew exactly where to look. As Nate navigated the snowy back roads, the excitement started to build. There's something about the quiet stillness of ice fishing. Just you, your friends, and the promise of the catch. Definitely beats drinking beer after beer at some random bar. As we pulled up to park near the trailhead, I noticed someone standing nearby. He was a few yards away, bundled up in heavy winter gear, but something about him didn't feel right. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at our truck. At first, I thought maybe he was just a fellow angler sizing us up, but then I saw him glance down at his phone, then back at us, then back at his phone again. For some reason, it didn't feel casual. I don't really know how to explain it. It just felt off. I muttered to my friends that that guy was creeping me out. The two of them looked up. Trevor shrugged his shoulders and Nate nodded but didn't say anything. We were about to start unloading when the man suddenly rushed towards us, waving his arms wildly. I rolled the window down to hear what he was saying. He started screaming that we needed to come help him immediately and that his buddy had just fallen through the ice. He pointed at his phone, saying the other guy they were with just told him. He sounded frantic, and his desperation was definitely real. We didn't even think. Trevor opened his door, and then we were all out following the man as he took off down the trail toward the lake. We didn't stop to grab anything, not even our coats. The urgency in his voice was enough to override any second thoughts. The man was practically sprinting, and we had to jog to keep up. As we got closer to the lake, I started to notice something that didn't sit right. He wasn't leading us to the usual fishing spots. Instead, we were heading toward a more remote part of the shoreline, away from where the ice was thickest. I was about to stop following, but it was too late. They appeared in view before we could do anything. Two more men standing near the edge of the lake. They weren't dressed for fishing, and they weren't moving. They were just standing there, waiting. I glanced down at their hands. They were both armed. My blood ran cold. One of them yelled at us to stop right there as we approached. He raised his gun and pointed it directly at me. I honestly can't describe the feeling that you get when someone points a gun at you. I hope no one ever has to experience what I felt that day. My heart dropped as the man we'd been following turned to face us, a smirk creeping across his face. We'd been set up. The second guy demanded Nate's keys, along with everything we had on our persons. We didn't really have a choice. These guys didn't seem like they were messing around. Nate reached into his pocket and tossed the truck keys to the man, and the three of us emptied our pockets. I tried to hang on to my phone, but one of the men told me phones too. Nate said his was in the car, which they laughed about. I've never been more furious in my life. How could we have been so foolish? I clenched my fists, wishing those guys weren't armed. I would have taken all of them on. Within moments, they grabbed everything and walked us back up the path at gunpoint before one of the men sped off in Nate's car. The other two backed away into the woods, presumably to their own vehicle. I debated following them, but I figured that wouldn't be much help. We stood there for a moment, shivering, before Nate pulled out his phone. I knew he had lied about it being in the car. I honestly don't know what we would have done had he not thought quickly on his feet. Somehow, we still had service. He called the police, explaining everything as calmly as he could. The dispatcher told us to stay put, and we huddled together for warmth as we waited for help to arrive. I was still so unbelievably angry. Nate was the worst, though. He kept kicking nearby trees and cursing at the top of his lungs. There was nothing Trevor or I could do to calm him down. The whole thing had happened so fast. I was honestly still processing it all. Why the hell would there be people out in the middle of nowhere on New Year's Eve of all days? It didn't make any sense. I'll skip all the boring details. The cops took an official report and were gracious enough to drive us all back to Trevor's house, which was the closest. As you might expect, Nate's car was never located, and those people were never caught. The three of us still can't believe what had happened. Trevor thinks we just stumbled into the wrong people at the wrong time. That they weren't planning on robbing us, but we just so happened to be the perfect targets. I think that's possible, but it still feels so unlikely. Who just springs a trap on some random people in the spur of the moment? But it also wouldn't make sense for them to be waiting for us at such a secluded spot. They had no guarantee anyone would show up. I really have no idea what to make of this whole incident.